Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyagena yopakarottam pravaram muninam Patanjalim Patanjali Dhanatosmi. So we are continuing this quadrangle of dukkha, that means dukkha chadurvyuha. That is a Vyasa's paradigm of spiritual discontent. That's what it be called. So the 16th sutra, Heyam Dukkham Anagatam. The problem to be got rid of is the suffering which is yet to come. Now I may have to say a few more things about this dukkha. The word dukkha, if you read the translation is grief or sorrow. It should not be understood just the sorrow that we feel at the physical or psychological level when something goes wrong. Really, it is a great spiritual concept. So this sorrow is what actually helps us to enter higher life. Not only higher spiritual life, even higher life. When we are not satisfied with what we have right now, then we look for something higher. That's the definition of yoga, is yoga chittavritti nirodha. But before that, there is one sutra at the beginning of the yoga scripture. Atha yoga anushasana. That's how Patanjali begins his text. Now, we are going to discuss yoga. We are going to have a discussion on this subject of yoga. That's the meaning of yoga anushasana. Anushasana means advice, instruction, discussion, exposition, and so on. Atha means what? Now onwards, hence, from now onwards. Why right now? Because right now we have come to a particular stage in our evolution. Not necessarily in spiritual evolution, even cultural evolution. When we feel a kind of dissatisfaction with what we are right now, with what we are doing or experiencing right now. Right now, we are at the physical level. We are working hard to make life in this world as comfortable as possible. And we are actively engaged in our efforts to acquire those tools or instruments which help our life a little more comfortable, a little more happy at a very physical level. But this is not enough. Think of a culture or a civilization which is purely physical. There is a subtle difference, a line of demarcation between civilization and culture in Vedic tradition. There are two Sanskrit words used. One is Samskriti. That is one. The other is Parishkriti. So Parishkriti is the term, is a Sanskrit term for what we normally understand civilization. And Samskriti is the term, that Samskriti is the term that is used for culture. Now, in Vedic terminology, this is very interesting. If you read some of the, some volumes, Will Durant's edition of the famous volumes, UNESCO publication, deals with culture, civilization, and so on. It begins with the prehistoric cultures, Sumerian, Babylonian, Aztec, Mayan, even earlier ones, Indo-Gangetic, Indus Valley civilization, and so on. And it reaches our own times. It deals with culture and civilization, which are used more or less as synonyms. But in Sanskrit language, there is a subtle difference between culture and civilization. You are civilized in the sense that you have got all the tools for physical comfort, all the instruments and tools that science and technology can provide, so that our life is easy. We can travel fast, comfortably. We can eat comfortably. We can have all the pleasures of this life in a very well organized, extremely streamlined manner. But in terms of culture, we may be worse than the primitive human beings. So, something which is external, which has to do with external way of life, which provides very efficient tools for enjoying this world and all the comforts that this world gives us. It is called civilization. It's called Parishkriti in Sanskrit. Samskriti means an inner refinement along with this civilization. An inner spiritual or cultural refinement. Now, one definition of Samskriti is this. When our activities to acquire the tools for physical comfort, means for physical comfort, are guided by the principles of dharma, we reach a point when we realize that all these physical comforts are peripheral. They cannot give us eternal peace and happiness and harmony within. And then we start looking for something higher, something that's not empirical, that is transcendental. This way of life, this pursuit of life is called Samskriti or culture. Civilization, on the other hand, is guided by dharma, but only to make our life more comfortable. We need some law and order. We need some organization and discipline and mutual understanding, give and take understanding. Why? Because we want to enjoy this world better. Not because we want to go beyond the peripheral transitory pleasures, but because we want to enjoy these momentary pleasures more efficiently. That's called civilization. Now, atha literally means right now we have exhausted all tools, all instruments for enjoyment in this world. Now we are looking for something higher, something transcendental. So we go for yoga. So this inner discontent, dissatisfaction, which is the hallmark, which is the sign of a higher culture, at an individual level or maybe national level, at any level. This is what is called dukkham. You can think of it. One man felt this dukkham or grief, so we got Buddhism. We got a great spiritual man called Buddha. So if you read Buddha's Jataka tales, we deal with different incarnations, different cycles of life that Buddha had to go through in this process of evolution. You find Buddha was born as princes, kings, animals, beggars, philosophers. He had to go through all these different life cycles before he was born as the son of a king in the 6th century BC. So all these Jataka tales deal with different previous births that Buddha had, different levels of culture that he had to go through before he reached Buddhahood when he was born as Gautama Buddha. So here, heyam dukkham anagatam. So here we are trying to get rid of the suffering which is yet to come. Yoga says, according to yoga, what we have already started going through cannot be stopped. But we can acquire a new perspective, a new spiritual wisdom to enable us to go through what we are right now going through. So whatever karmas we have already done in the past have produced their result, and as the result of that, we have taken this body. That is yoga philosophy's view. We have taken this body. So we are going through a particular set of experiences which were determined, nature of which were determined by our actions in the previous life. It's like an arrow that has left the bow. It has to hit it should hit the mark. It cannot be destroyed. But at the same time, we can develop a new yogic perspective, a new approach towards our life. And this wisdom is called dukkham here. So, dukkha, you often, if you read the translations, you often find it is a suffering is mentioned. So remember, it is not a suffering in the form of misery. You don't feel wretched or miserable. You get a higher wisdom, and that higher wisdom enables you to look upon this relative imperfect world and recognize it as relative and imperfect. Not to run away from it, but to look at it and to face it with a creative, more constructive, yogic approach. That is the real implication of the word dukkham, because this dukkham gives you a new perspective and a new practical intelligence, a new insight into our own life, our own problems. One more example I can give, because I dealt with this subject, but I am just concluding our discussion on the 16th Sutra, Heyam Dukkham Anagatam. There are two important ideas to be understood to fully appreciate this yoga perspective. One is, of course, this I already mentioned earlier. One is the fact that life is not one. Life is a continuous process. Death is not the end of our existence. Death is only a transition point. And whatever we do, whatever efforts we make in this life to evolve further in spiritual growth, spiritual life, will always produce creative, constructive, positive result, which will benefit us in our future life. This is one. So here you can find these two principles intertwined. One is law of karma and the law of rebirth. So these are two important points to be understood. Now, another point is our efforts to avoid suffering which is yet to come. It's called Heyam Dukkham Anagatam. That means the suffering or the misery of getting identified with the momentary objective experiences one after another and not being able to understand our own true spiritual nature. So, to effort to understand this may have many stumbling blocks. Our constant effort may have to face many challenges. To give an example of this, I shall narrate one interesting, very famous episode from one of our classics, and then go to the next sutra. The importance, the implication of our constant spiritual practices, and how it is important to constantly enrich our mind stuff with positive thought currents. This is an interesting story from Bhagavata Purana, which once I mentioned during the Sunday lectures perhaps. The story is the story of a great emperor. His name was, he was a great emperor. He was a philosopher. So in ancient times, as I mentioned earlier, when kings or emperors or whoever may be, when they reach their old age, to be very specific, when they see the face of the grandchildren, that is the meaning of a verse which says, Grahastasya yada pashet vali palidam atmanaha apatyasya apatyam tada aranyam samasayet. It's a famous dictum, a statement in Manu Smriti, which is a great lawgiver, Manu, who lived around 3000 BC. The meaning is this: an householder should take to contemplative life when he becomes a grandfather. So, contemplative life, here of course in the verse, if you read the literal translation, you'll be shocked. You should go to a forest. Tada aranyam samasi, that's literal meaning. Here, forest means a place for contemplation. It may be your own home. It may be a place where you go and spend some time in contemplation, thinking of higher cultural or spiritual values, when you have no more obligation to your wife and children in this world, when you have already settled all their needs and requirements. No more obligations. So at that time, what happens? You should think of your next cycle of life. So you should go to a place of contemplation. When the hair gets grey and the face gets wrinkled, that's literal meaning. Anyway, so this king, Bharata, that's his name, he was such a wise man. So he decided to make his eldest son, eldest and most efficient person, his son, as the next king, and he left his kingdom, his comforts, everything, palace, he left behind and went to forests. He knew that he didn't have many more years to live. He had already had a full life. There was nothing more for him to do. So this is a common practice. And many of the great spiritual classics in ancient times were written by these philosophers who left their homes and went to forest or some hermitages, some ashramas, and spent the rest of their lifetime in contemplation, meditation, and writing books, spiritual classics. So this king was one such wise man. So he went to a forest, and there he built a small thatched house and stayed there. There was a river nearby. Every day he will take bath. He will do japa, meditation, and he will eat only some fruits and nuts available in the wild berries available in the forest trees. So one day it so happened that a small deer was being chased by a lion. And as the deer was frightened, he was running, it fell into the stream, and in the process, the deer, which was pregnant, gave birth to a baby deer, which fell in the water. It was floating on the water. And the deer ran away, and somehow he went somewhere and died. The mother deer. The little baby deer was floating in the water. Now the king felt great compassion for the little one. He saved its life, rescued it from the water, and brought it up in his hermitage. So the little baby deer started growing up in the hermitage. So every day the king will get up in the morning while doing meditation, spiritual practices. Little by little, he became reluctant. He became lax in his regular meditation and started spending more and more time to bring grass, leaves for the deer to look after it, because the forest was infested with wild animals, lions and tigers. So it was his duty to see that the little deer is not harmed by any of these wild animals. So his mind practically shifted from spiritual practices to the deer, to the comforts of the deer. Now you again remember, the man was a great king. He had left his own children in his palace, left everything behind, had come to the forest, and he already spent many years in meditation and spiritual practices. And after some years, this happened. So when it was the time for him to die. He was about to die, the old man. The little deer came to him, stood nearby. So the man felt compassion for the deer, and he died, focusing his attention on the deer instead of meditating on God. So you can imagine this happened. So very often in our life, in some way or other, our mind may get detached from our central spiritual goal. It could happen in a flash of moment. It could happen in a very unexpected way. But that would cause a long delay in our spiritual evolution. That's what we are going to see in the life of this great king. Now you can remember, the king had already reached a very high level of cultural evolution, spiritual evolution, when he found his vast kingdom, his wealth, his comforts are nothing. So he wanted to acquire higher spiritual wisdom. For that, he renounced everything, left behind, and went to a forest, spent several years in meditation, and finally he started living just to look after a deer. Now you may ask the question, compassion is a great thing. Buddha was willing to lay down his life to save the life of a lamb. You may have heard of the story. So many of you may have heard the story. There was a big sacrifice going on which involved animal sacrifice. So they needed a lot of goats and lambs to sacrifice, ancient times. So Buddha was walking and he found a shepherd leading a large number of goats and lambs. So one lamb was limping, so Buddha took it on his shoulders and he reached the place. You spared this fellow's life. I'm ready to die on behalf of this lamb. So that was enough to bring a total transformation in the mind of the great emperor, Bimbisara, who was the great emperor. This happened around 6th century BC. He was a mighty emperor of 6th century BC in India. The whole Indian subcontinent under his control. And this man stopped his animal sacrifices that moment when he found a great sage like Buddha was ready to lay down his life to save the life of a lamb. So somebody reading this story may ask, compassion, is not compassion a great value? But remember, Buddha did this after he became Buddha. This king had not become a Buddha. He was on the way to become a Buddha. Buddha means the enlightened one. That's what it means. So in the example of the King Bharata, he was a spiritual practitioner. He was slowly evolving. At that time, his mind was shifted from the central object to something else. So it was not just compassion of a Buddha, but it was the attachment that happens when your mind is distracted from your spiritual goal. So what happened? The king died, breathed his last, looking upon the baby deer and thinking about the deer. And he was born as a deer. That's the next phase of his life. So he was born as a deer in the next life. This great king, the great spiritual seeker. But he had not forgotten his great qualities that he had in his previous life. He had renounced his kingdom. He had practiced spiritual sadhana for many years. He did spiritual practice for many years, sitting on the bank of the river. And then after several years, this distraction took place. So his accumulated spiritual wealth won't go in vain. It is already there. It won't be lost. That's one central point to be kept in mind. So in yoga, we don't have to worry that, if I don't fully succeed, all my efforts will go in vain. No. Even if we practice a little, it will remain in our account. See, so Swalpam apyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bhaya. This is a famous statement in the Gita. Even a little bit of practice can become a great boon, a great blessing in our life. That's what Lord Krishna says in the Gita. So that's what is going to happen to this king. He was born as a deer, but he was a wise fellow, this deer. Suddenly he remembered, after some years, it remembered his previous life. And what he did, he left that herd of deers from the forest, went in search of an ashrama, a spiritual hermitage, and lived there, eating grass and leaves. He was a philosopher deer, so to speak. Because he was very contemplative. Why? So this is a very important thing. It is very contemplative. Evolution is not confined to the human world. This evolution is so universal. That's a very central point of yoga. You never waste even a little bit of your effort in spiritual life. Even if a great idea had registered itself in our mind, it will remain there. Now what happens, this deer, it left its herd. It didn't live like other deers. And it left that place, went in search of a calm and quiet place, which it wanted. It was the great King Bharata in his previous life. So he reached an hermitage and stayed there. And after some years it died. Now the deer was thinking about God when he died. The king was thinking about deer when he died. You can see the contrast. The king who had left his kingdom and palace, his own dear children, later became attached to a deer and died thinking of the deer and was born as a deer. The deer, on the other hand, did not think of deers. It thought of God, and it was born in its next life as a great contemplative man, as a great wise spiritual person. So in his third life, he was born as Jata Bharata. Jata means dull, inactive, fellows who couldn't understand anything, lifeless, like that. Lifeless, that means. People who are dull, who cannot do anything, who cannot understand anything, you may call him Jada. So in the third life, this deer was born as a hefty, muscular fellow, but calm and quiet. And he was born as the younger son in a family. So his elder brothers thought this fellow was dull. So they made him do all the physical labor, because they did not send him to school. So his education was also neglected. His father was a loving person. So the father taught him certain things, and he did not show any external sign of brilliance, but he studied everything as if he was trying to do it all for his father's sake, his satisfaction. And finally, he left his home and nobody bothered. You can imagine if a person who is dull, who won't do anything, who can understand if you tell him then you won't care. It happens. In those days also it happened. The poor man was not driven out, but he just went away from his home and started walking. But actually he was a great philosopher. He was the great king. But you know why he acted to be a deaf, dull person? The man remembered, in one of his life, he was attached to a deer. Just wanted, out of his compassion, he rescued the life of a little baby deer. And he spent all his lifetime to provide food for the deer. Old man. Sometimes he'll meditate, but all the time he was concerned whether some wild animals will come and eat away this little creature. So his mind was shifted. He remembered that. So he was very careful. Any kind of spiritual phobia, Very careful. So he acted as he was a dull person, so that nobody would bother him. But actually he was not dull. He was the most brilliant person, as we are going to find out. Now, and he started walking, and then, one king was passing through that road in a palanquin. Servants, hefty, muscular fellows will bear the palanquin, and that's how the kings used to travel in those days through wild forests. They found this man, he's in Jadabharada, walking. They called him. We need somebody. They were looking for some strong fellow, muscular fellow, to bear this palanquin. So they found him. Made him do that. But he was not trained, so he was walking his own way, not exactly keeping the balance. So other servants got angry. They were scolded by the king. Then the king asked him, "Why do you do that? Why don't you bear this palanquin properly? You don't know how to do this. How dull you are." Then this man gave a reply which opened the king's eyes. "Whom are you talking about? As for this body is a part of the 5 elements. It comes today, it disappears tomorrow. It is transitory. It is not immortal. This body is an empirical thing that comes and goes, not permanent. And what is the other element? The Atman, the soul, the self, the consciousness. That is everywhere. Where to go? You want me to bear your palanquin properly and walk properly. Go. This Atman is all pervading. It is omnipresent. How can it travel? As for the body, you cannot do anything with this body. It is subject to destruction." Now, the name of the king was Rahugana. This man asked the other servants, "You stop." He got down and he prostrated. He lay flat at the feet of this man, Jadabharata. "Sir, I am sorry I scolded you. Who are you? You are speaking the highest wisdom. Please teach me." And there's a long dialogue between the two. Now the question is, so you can imagine 3 cycles of existence. So we may feel this spiritual dissatisfaction, the spiritual discontentment. And it could come, and when what happens? Frequently, one momentary mistake, error, may create a great distraction, may lead to a great distraction, which, according to yoga, could cause long delay in our spiritual evolution. Just because the king forgot his spiritual practices, he had to go through additional 2 more life cycles in this story. So, dukkham should be understood, this journey to higher wisdom. This dukkham is what you call this kind of feeling of inner dissatisfaction, discontentment, is actually a sign of cultural maturity, spiritual maturity. It is totally different from the feeling of wretchedness or miserable. We don't feel miserable. Spiritual dissatisfaction, spiritual discontentment, a divine discontentment, doesn't make you miserable. It makes you wise. Because it's like the thirst for knowledge of a brilliant boy who is studying 5th grade, who may like to study books prescribed for students in the 6th grade. It is so he will feel, well, what I've studied not enough, I want to study more. So it is actually a sign of spiritual wisdom. This is a real implication of this word dukkha. Because why I took a long time to discuss this point. Translations cannot, and no translator can give full justice to these technical terms in yoga. Yoga is a technical work. It's like engineering and medical work, where you need a master to explain every technical point at every stage. Translations can never do full justice. So this dukkha is something that's a line of demarcation between highly cultured, refined, evolved human beings and others. Now, in the 17th verse, the cause of the suffering from the Yoga Sankhya point of view is explained. Drashta drishyayoho samyogo heya hetuhu. This is the description. So, what is the real cause of this suffering? To give in a nutshell, in a single sentence, every moment we associate with various external objects which constitute drishyam. Drishyam means the universe, the world of objects, what is seen, experienced in the external world is called drishyam. Drashta means the one who experiences, the experiencer, the seer is drashta. Now, frequently what happens, we identify ourselves with whatever experiences, with whatever external objects we happen to interact with. And this total identification creates problems. So what happens here? Our true nature is that we are Purusha, the conscious reality. And the external world is called Prakriti. It's called Drishyam, or the experience, the world of experiences. Drashta is Purusha, that's our true nature. It's Atman in Vedanta, according to Vedantians. So we forget that we are the Atman. And once we forget it, we identify ourselves with whatever we experience. You can easily find this in our everyday life. I mean, coming all the way down from philosophy into daily life, we can feel. So when we feel angry, we identify ourselves with that anchor. Our mind takes the form of that anchor. Our mind may also take the form of the object towards which we feel this anger. So also, when we feel too much attached in a negative way, obsessed with something, what we are obsessed with, we identify ourselves with that object that we are obsessed with. This happens through eyes, ears, sense of touch, sense of sight, sense of hearing, sense of taste, and sense of smell. For the time being, we identify ourselves with whatever we experience. Actually, modern psychology will tell you our mind takes the form of what we identify with. For example, when you hear the sound of a vehicle moving in the street, from a split second, our mind takes the form of the vehicle, if we know the vehicle. Otherwise, our mind takes the form of that that sound phenomenon. So also hearing, seeing, smelling, touching, tasting, anything. If you eat something, we identify ourselves with that sweet object. Otherwise people won't pay money to these things, Really speaking, if we do not mentally enjoy the sweetness of sweets, we won't pay money for that. It is to enjoy that momentary impulse that we pay amount. Otherwise, suppose tomorrow onwards, somebody tells you take these pills, you don't have to eat food, you don't have to. San Francisco is very famous for its cuisine and all that, But suppose all the wonderful things which are available in restaurant, if you can have in your body, if you eat this capsule, then whole world of enjoyment will vanish right in front of us. So practically we are all going for this because the mind feels a great joy because the mind takes the form of that taste for the time being. It also takes the form of the visual object. When we see a movie, the mind takes the form of that object. Otherwise, we won't be able to enjoy it. It is not the eyes that enjoy, it's the mind that is enjoying. So the audio form, the visual form, all these actually enter our mind, and the buddhi is called buddhi. This means our mind intellect system, chittam, so to speak. It takes that form. So this samyoga takes place, identification. That's the meaning of the sutra. It's a long, very important sutra which we'll discuss in detail in the coming classes also. So drashta drishyoho samyogo heya hetu. So the cause of this suffering is this identification. So yogi may also enjoy food, but the yogi will not be enjoying the food the way a man who is born to eat, and instead of eating to live or living to eat, so to speak. Those who consider eating itself as a great thing, and whole mind is completely absorbed in the act of eating and enjoying the taste. That's not the way yogi will eat. That's the idea behind. Swami Vivekananda gives an interesting example in the yoga lectures. It's a very famous example. He gives the example, if you don't mind, you don't feel hurt by this. He gives the example of a dog. You throw a piece of meat before the dog, and you try to throw a stone, it won't feel that pain because it is eating the piece of meat. It is so completely absorbed in eating that meat. If the dog is hungry especially. Vivekananda gives an example. But a civilized, cultured, educated person may be eating in dining hall, but if you give him a blow, he will be distracted by that. But dog will not be distracted. Because human being will not be able to enjoy food the way dog is enjoying food. Because dog is a less evolved. As we get more evolved, we will be able to transcend ourselves beyond the visual or audio or sensory experiences. The dog is not able to do that. Because for the dog, when he's hungry, a piece of meat is something so precious that it completely gets identified with it. So this is what happens. But a highly evolved person, even if he's eating food, can think and discuss and think of higher things other than the food. So the samyoga, that identification is less and less as we evolve in spiritual life, even in intellectual life, in cultural life. The samyoga, the identification of our sense of what we are with what we experience externally is less and less as we evolve more and more in cultural and spiritual life. A great poet, a mystic, will not be absorbed when he is eating his food, as the food is the most precious thing in this world. Mind may be elsewhere. Now what happens is, to the extent this identification is more and more intimate, the stronger this identification, the greater the pain. The less the identification, the less the pain, less the suffering. So this samyoga should be undone. That is the purpose of yoga, and that's a way out of suffering. That's what a yogi is trying to do. Now we will discuss this subject. We don't have time. Okay, we will discuss this sutra in the next class. It's a very important sutra, which in a way gives a very scientific, rational, and psychological explanation of what we actually go through in our everyday life, and how we can get out of this trap. That's the subject of discussion in the next class. That is drashta drishyayoho samyogo heya hetuhu. So there are different views given by Vyasa in his commentary, Vijnana Bhikshu in his commentary, and also by Bhoja. These three great thinkers, they give different explanations. So what happens is, according to Vyasa, this buddhi it functions like a magnet, and it attracts external objects. And we become identified with the external objects through buddhi. According to Vijnana Bhikshu, another commentator, Chittam is the magnet. According to Bhoja, who wrote the famous book Maniprabha, Purusha is the magnet. And in the presence of Purusha, the Chitta or mind stuff attracts external objects. It's a very interesting, highly scientific description of how our mind functions at all times. So we'll discuss this subject in the next class. Now we will have interaction for some time.
Swamiji, in the Sutra 16,
Yeah.
Swamiji makes a comment
Yes.
that the most important thing for us is to deal with the karma that hasn't fructified. That's the results will come in future.
Yeah.
And that according to Patanjali, we should try to resolve those samskaras into their causal state.
Could you repeat this once more? What you said just now, please, once more, according to Swamiji?
What Swamiji says in his commentary in verse 16
Yeah.
is that the karma that is yet to fructify
That is
most important for us.
here,
That we can control by resolving it into its causal state.
Yes,
Can you explain that?
Yes, here Swamiji translates dukkham as karma there. Dukkham and karma are interrelated. So anagata means yet to come, yet to be experienced, that is to fructify in future. So dukkham is closely related to karma. Practically they are interrelated. They have a cause and effect relationship. They are mutually dependent. Every dukkha is related to a corresponding karma. There is no dukkha, there is no suffering which is not rooted in some kind of karma. And there is no karma which is not accompanied by some kind of suffering or dukkha. So how to avoid what is yet to come? By taking a yoga perspective, by understanding, by finding out the root cause of this. So the root cause of all dukkha is karma. And the root cause of all karma is dukkha. Actually, they are interdependent. So we have to reduce all the effects to their cause. And once we understand the cause, we can avoid the cause. And once cause is avoided, the effects, the results also could be avoided. Whatever sufferings we may have to face in future, we are sowing the seeds of those sufferings right now. So this yoga perspective enables you to stop any kind of karmas which can cause suffering in future. So once we take the yoga perspective, then we are no more trapped. So in that's how we are going to stop the experience of karmas which are yet to come. That's why yoga is sometimes compared by a commentator to a wind that is blowing. Now the example is this. The the arrow had left the bow. Normally, it should hit the mark. That's how, that is the prarabdha karma, whatever karmas which are we going through. But that could be modified. You can't say that the arrow has to hit the mark. Suppose a wind blows in between. During the flight of the arrow, it could deflect the arrow. It could distract it from one to another in another direction. It could happen. So yoga is like this wind. Two important principles are compared to this wind in the Vedantic tradition. One is kripa, grace of God. The other one, yoga. Yoga in a way is our own effort, spiritual practice. Both help us to deflect the flight of the arrow. So, whatever has not yet happened could be stopped by taking this yogic perspective. Because once we get established in yoga, this misidentification of the Purusha with Prakriti, of the Drashta with the Drishya, will come to an end. Then there is no more suffering, no more karma. That's how it stops. Swamiji gives a very readable, modern interpretation. But it's Swamiji, so most of Swamiji's views are based on Vyasa's commentary and Bhoja Vritti and Bhoja Maniprabha, these two commentators.
Swamiji also seems to make a distinction when he discusses dukkha from the experience that we have in coming in contact with sense objects as opposed to existential dukkha, just the very state of the human condition.
No, that's true. No, the existential dukkha is not unrelated to this misidentification. The cosmic dukkha, the existential dukkha is rooted in this. It functions now in the everyday life in the form of this misidentification. Every time when the buddhi takes the form of a visual or audio object, or any kind of experiences at the level of the sense of touch, sense of smell, whatever may be. Every time this misidentification takes place, it's because the vritti sarupyam, that's Patanjali says, vritti sarupyam itaratra. Where you are not established in yoga, vritti sarupyam is inevitable. Vritti sarupyam means buddhi taking the rupa of the drishya objects. That is vritti sarupyam. So what happens, when we see an object, our mind takes the form of the vritti of the visual object. This happens because there is the fundamental ignorance. That ignorance is the real cause of dukkha. It is called asmita in Vedantic terminology. Asmita is the cause. Asmita is the essence, is the root cause of all this dukkha. At the existential level. At the individual level, in our everyday life, it functions in the form of vritti sarupyam, in the form of our buddhi taking the form of external visual objects and modifications. That's the idea. So, any other question from this? Come.
So, in the context of the story that you mentioned, of King Bharata.
Bharata. Yeah.
Can you explain it from a concept of dharma? So, what should have been his dharma?
Yes. The king should have saved the deer, but at the same time should have kept in mind his supreme goal is to realize God. In fact, Buddha did this after reaching the goal. The king had not reached that goal. If he had reached that goal, he would have still saved the deer, but he would not be thinking of the deer when the time of death. So the Bhagavata, the text says, there's a very long description of the last moment of the king. The little deer came to him looking for food, because the dry grass and things used to be kept there by the king for it. He didn't find it there. The king is lying there. So it came and stood. The longs and the verses are the slokas. Then the king looked at him. Oh, what a pity. Now after I'm going, so some lions may come and eat up this poor little creature. What to do like that? Okay, now the point is, if you're a wise person, he would still have protected the deer, but his mind would not be on the deer. Buddha saved the life of a lamb, but Buddha was ready to die for it, but still a Buddha could do that without his mind being attached to that act of compassion. Act of compassion is common in all noble human beings and also in the most enlightened spiritual personalities. The main difference is, among the enlightened beings, it could become a chain that binds you. If you are just a practitioner, if you are still in the process of evolving, practicing doing spiritual practices, you should be careful about it. That's the meaning here. That's why I gave a juxtaposition, a comparative knowledge of both. There are other stories. They were, instead of giving the life of a son, were ready to kill a lamb, But here Buddha was ready to give his own life for the lamb, See the contrast. Buddha was ready to give his own life for the... So, it's very interesting. So, Buddha was a person who went beyond that. It's okay. I think we can continue the discussion in the next class. Most welcome. All questions. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Sri Rama Krishna Paramastu.